Hi, and welcome to my third video podcast slash post. You may be wondering why I'm doing so many. There are a couple of reasons. One, I think there's a lot of things going on in the markets now that are really interesting in the macro markets for the first time in a while. And B, the website I use, Substack, has just launched this video option. So I'm just trying to test it out to see if it works for me, whether it works for you, the viewers. I'm hoping to move, I'll probably move back to having some sort of paywall next week. But for this week, there's a number of things I can talk about. I'll do it free so everyone can watch it. Please comment negatively or positively. I love negative comments. I can improve from there. And thank you so far for your support. I'm actually in some ways overwhelmed that people have been so supportive. Thank you for that. So this one, Russell Clark on Shale and macro markets. What's it all about? And two related factors that really I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years. That is what shale is in the States and whether it is a real industry or not, and how that affects macro markets. So let's have a look. So the first thing you should know about shale is that it's transformed the US energy markets. So I've just shown oil and gas production from '07 here. Both US oil and US gas production has doubled more or less over that period. And particularly oil was in a long-term decline in the States. And what shale has done is really transformed the US energy position. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with shale, shale or frac drilling, it's basically breaking up rock to that oil and gas escape. And when I looked at it, it was like, this is an industry that could maybe produce oil. Definitely is very good for gas, but maybe produce oil. But I had my doubts about it. And one of my biggest doubts was that when you looked at it, these industries, a lot of these businesses, even though they're growing production, never made any money. And so I took a very closer look at shale, and I found for me there was some big issues with it and a lot of big question marks over it. And what I thought we would see, we start to see a very sharp decline in US oil production as the amount of capital was put into this industry. And the reason I thought that was that when you look at shale, you can split out new production and decline. So shale is very different to traditional oil in that about 50% of total production from the well comes out in the first year. In a traditional well, you're looking at a sort of natural slow decline with let's say if the well life is 20 years, you end up with 5% of production coming out every year. With shale, you get a big 50% bump and then it drops off. So what I've done here is just taken out the sort of 12-month rolling new production and the decline. And so to actually grow production in the States, you need the new production, a new amount of oil coming out of the ground to be higher than the amount that's falling off. And the amount that's the decline. And the decline tends to be how much oil you produced a year ago. So it's almost like this potential running machine. And my observation is that the industry was essentially just always just destroying capital because it was sprinting to stay still, and this is getting faster and faster and faster. And so one of my predictions was that if capital was starved in this industry, then you would be very unlikely to see production grow in the States, and in fact for it to go into decline. And also that most of the shale drillers would be what I would call capital destruction machines and not generate any return for shareholders. Now, one of the natural effects of this need for capital was that drilling companies needed to show growth. They needed to get a growth multiple. They're going to say, we're going to be growing, growing, growing. You need to try and get cost of capital as low as possible. And this led to what is a previously unknown phenomenon of drilled uncompleted wells, DUCs. And that means they've drilled them, but they've left them there not producing oil, being ready to produce at some future date. And the way I looked at it, this drilled uncompleted wells were like wells that were being drilled to show that the company was growing, but actually were probably unproductive. And even worse, to me, if this was a real possibility, is that the wells were drilled so close together because they're trying to show as much growth, is that if you actually completed these wells, it would cause pressure in all existing wells to fall, and so the legacy decline would suddenly shoot up in a much more rapid way. And so you'd start going into a huge decline in US oil production, at least. Gas production would probably be okay, but the oil production would decline. And what we've seen since COVID is, yes, capital got cut off, and we've seen a huge decline in the number of uncompleted wells, drilled uncompleted wells. So the inventory of wells seen out there has in fact declined. And so my original thesis was that we start to see some real problems emerging from the US shale oil and gas industry when this would happen. What we have seen is this isn't the case. So we take the Permian, which is by the most important oil producing region for the US. What we've seen is that the Permian has reached new all-time highs in production, even with the amount of rigs being in operation, still well below the highs that we saw in pre-COVID or even before that. So what this implies is that my prediction that shale was an industry that wouldn't work in the long run, that destroyed capital, and that a lot of these drilled uncompleted wells were actually fictional wells, just there to attract capital. I think that was true to a degree. A lot of the very dodgy operators in the shale industry have left. It has been a capital destructive industry. That has all been true. But what we see from the data now is that shale may actually be the real deal. And my original title for this presentation is Shale the Real Deal? And I must say, looking at the data as it's come out, I'm starting to think that shale is the real deal. Is not matching up with what I would expect it to happen once capital was starved for this industry. What does this mean? So now, what that means is that one of the benefits the states gets is that oil, which is a very high price, or high-ish, 90 odd bucks, when that's drilled and it's profitable drill, also produces natural gas, and that natural gas is almost like a freebie. And so with shale oil works, US natural gas becomes cheap and stays cheap. And what we have seen since the end of COVID is there's been a natural gas shortage in the rest of the world. Now, these charts, the Asian price is priced exactly the same as the US, Henry Hub, cubic feet per meter. Europe uses an electricity price in euros. What I've basically sort of done is just sort of match them off, just left them as they are so you can see the dynamic that's happening there. And so what you can see is, yes, there was an oversupply of energy from 2018 through 2020, and natural gas prices collapsed, energy prices collapsed. And now where we are is that energy prices in Asia and Europe have gone gangbusters, absolutely blockbuster, and the US natural gas price stays very low. So what the experiment of COVID has meant is that natural gas prices in the US has remained low because shale is real. So from that conclusion that shale drilling is the real deal, the implication then is that the US has a long-term abiding advantage in commodity pricing in natural gas and in oil. And if that is the case, and it increasingly looks that way, I mean, it may be that we're still working through some COVID issues and maybe things will change back to my original hypothesis. But what it says at the moment is the US is a low-cost oil and gas producer and is going to remain a low-cost oil and gas producer for the foreseeable future. This may well explain why the relationship between commodities and the US dollar has completely broken down. So what we see here in this chart is a massive increase in commodity price index back to new all-time highs. The dollar index stays at all-time highs. So to make this work, I've inverted the dollar index, so lower is stronger. It's not ideal, but it gives you an idea of where we are. And so we are, in a period of, again, big macro changes. and driven by technological change, as it is in many cases. And it does imply that maybe dollar weakness is not going to return despite very large moves in commodity prices. All right, that's the end of the presentation. This has been my last free video one for a little while. I'll go back to using the paywall going forward, but I just wanted to do sort of 3 test ones with totally free. If you like what you see, please become a paid subscriber. I do have costs. If this is all helpful to you in thinking about the world, or if I help you make your money, please feel free to subscribe. I'm also very willing to take any sort of recommendations or ideas that you'd like me to look into. Okay, well, thanks for your time.